Hello everybody. As you all are well aware, in both Character Creator and iClone, we can take our characters and there's a wide assortment of clothing options that we can easily just drag and drop onto our characters. And besides the options that you already have available, you can, of course, download other outfits as well, which you can apply to your characters. But sometimes it would be nice to be able to create from scratch your own clothing and accessories for your characters. And that's what we'll take a look at in this video here. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this character and I'm going to export it out as, I'll export it out as an OBJ. I could export it out as an FBX as well, but we'll go ahead and try it as an OBJ here. So I'm going to go ahead and export it out with axis Y is up because that's what is the up axis in Maya. And we'll just tell it where to save it to. I'm saving it in a Maya project if you're interested. And we'll go ahead and go to Maya and see what we have. So here we are in Maya, and what I'm going to do is import in that file that I just exported. And here it is. Now, for this example, I'm going to be creating a baseball cap. Something like this here. So I always recommend when modeling things such as hats or accessories or anything else, to do a little research first. Don't just trust what you think, in this case, a baseball cap looks like. Actually study and look for reference images. In this case, some things that I might not think about unless I actually do the research is about the bend in the the bill of the hat here. Some other things I might look at would be the way that a person actually wears the hat. And I notice, for instance, in this case, that it's got this slight diagonal on this person's head. So it's always good to do a little bit of research first before you actually jump into modeling. Now, I'm not going to really get into the specifics of modeling in Maya. I have lots of other videos available if you're interested in checking those out about different modeling techniques in Maya. But I'm going to go ahead and model it. I'll speed up the video at this point and perhaps slow it back down in parts where I want to explain a little bit more about what I'm doing. So I basically created the form for the hat. I'm pretty happy with it. You saw that it was just a few very simple techniques. Basically, I started out with a polygon primitive, a sphere. I cut it in half. I created an extrude for the bill of the hat. And then I just used some very simple techniques to gently shape the hat to give it a little bit more form, but nothing really all that fancy. I have history on this object right now, as you can see here. So I do like to delete that periodically. I like to get rid of that history. I also like to make sure that I actually have the mesh named. Now the next step would be to create UVs for it. Right now the UVs are a bit of a mess, but if I wanted to be able to properly apply textures and materials to this hat, I will need to have some UVs done. So that's the next step that I'm going to work on now. So I've completed UV unwrapping the hat, and here are my UVs. This is the mapping that will allow me to apply textures to this mesh. A couple things that I was thinking about as I was doing these UVs, a couple things that I wish that maybe I had handled a little bit differently first in the modeling phase. I'd like to just quickly discuss. First of all, you'll notice on this hat here that it's actually divided into 6 segments with these seams. And also, if we look at these various hats here, you'll see that there's a seam here as well too. While I created what is mostly a seamless mesh, oftentimes I think that the best thing to do when modeling is actually to take these seams into consideration, especially if they'll help you with your UV unwrapping to make it easier, to make it better. For instance, in particular where the bill meets the cap here, I could have done the bill as a separate mesh because it makes logical sense perhaps to have a seam there anyway. So it doesn't really matter as much to have that be seamless on my texture. So just a thought, I probably would have modeled this a little bit differently had I kept those things in mind. I may have even modeled the sections around the cap in a little bit differently, keeping some of these areas as obvious seams because that's the way that an actual hat is constructed. Anyway, as I said, that's just a thought to think about when modeling. But for the time being, I think this hat will be adequate for what I'm wanting to do with this example. I am going to delete this history here because it's unnecessary. It doesn't really help me at this point. And what I'm going to do is export out an image that I can then use to create my textures. So I'm going to return to my UV editor, and in here I'm going to go to Image, UV Snapshot. I have it currently set to 2048 by 2048, which is a good file size. I'm going to tell it where to save it to, however. And now that I've exported that out, I'll go over to Photoshop and open up that template. So this template here basically conforms to my my UV map that I created for the model itself. So now I can use this as a guide when creating textures. So now that I've created a texture for it, let's go ahead and try it out. Try it out in Maya before we actually bring it into Character Creator. So I'm simply going to apply that texture that I just created to my hat, and we'll see how it looks. So right now, it looks pretty good, but I think I need to adjust the placement of the bee here on the cap. So I'm going to return back to Photoshop and do that. So I think for the time being, I'm done with this texture here. Obviously, we could put a lot more work into it. Right now, this blue is just a solid color. We could make it look more like fabric. We could create other things like bump maps and that kind of thing, which I might cover in a later video. But for the time being, I think this shall suffice. So let's go ahead now and see about bringing it into Character Creator. So I'm just going to quickly check and see that the pivot point is where I want it. I think I'll place it more like perhaps here. I'll go ahead and freeze those transforms in case I haven't already done that. It looks like I've already renamed it. So I think this should be good. Now with my mesh selected, I'm going to go to File, Export Selection. And I will be exporting it out as an FBX. And naturally, I need to tell it where to save it to. Let's go ahead and return to Character Creator now and see if we can bring this new asset in to our scene. So here's the character, and I'm not going to go to File, Import, but rather to Create Accessory. I'll navigate to where I've just saved that file, and we'll go ahead and open and bring it in. Now, there really is a lot more, of course, that we could do with the texture and material. There are a few quick changes we will do, however. With the cap selected, I'm going to go to the Modify panel to the Materials. Here you can see my diffuse map here. This is the map that I just created. And we do have a couple settings in here that we can change that will make the appearance look a little bit better. For this particular example, I don't really think I need to have this specularity on it, at least not to the extent that it's on there now, so I'll go ahead and bring that down. The other thing I will do is I want to make sure I actually select the texture here. I'm going to adjust the strength. Right now you can see it's set to 80. If I make it less, you can see what happens. We want to go ahead and crank that all the way up to 100. There we go. And that looks a lot better. Now again, if we started to do some more of these, work with more of these properties such as bump and maybe even use some specular on it in parts, we could get a more convincing looking material for it, but I think I'll leave that for a later video. So let's test this out. And what I'm going to do is go to content, and we'll try putting a pose on this character. And I think we will run into a slight problem here. Let's find out. And you can see that the hat is not on the character's head. So let's see what we can do about that. I'm going to go ahead and put the character back into T-pose, and we'll do a couple things then that'll make the hat stay on the character's head here. So I currently have the hat selected. That's important because we're going to be changing its properties here. In the Modify panel, I'm going to go over to the Adjustments tab here. And what we want to do is, let's take a look at this. We're going to go to Transfer Weights. Here you can see that we have a bunch of templates here. I'm going to apply Other. And we'll go ahead and close that. Now that we've done that, let's go ahead and test it again. And now it appears to be working. Let's go ahead and try applying some hair to this character. And obviously this becomes a bit of a problem. So I'm going to select the hat. And I'll go back to the Modify, Adjustments, and I'll click on Conform. Here there is an option for Increase Size. Which will allow us to make adjustments to the hat so that it can fit the hair better. Now in this case, it may look a little ridiculous if we were to make the hat this big, but I did want to show you that that's one way that we can quickly and easily fix things. Here it looks like it's going to be a balance of adjusting the hat size along with perhaps making adjustments to the hair itself. So one of the ways that we could make this work is by selecting the hair and coming once again over here to the Modify Adjustment and coming to Edit Mesh. Now with Edit Mesh, of course, we can use our Soft Select, which will allow us to move the hair in so that it's no longer visible, so that's not overlapping with the hat here. But then there's actually a couple other things that we can do as well that might be a little bit more intuitive. For instance, if we come over here to the sculpt, we've got some options for pushing or pulling the geometry. Currently the brush is on pull, so it's gonna bring the hair out further, but if we change that to push, we can push the hair in. And yet another option is to simply hide it. So instead of pushing the geometry in, we can select this eyeball icon, the Show Mesh brush. And we can simply hide the parts of the mesh that we don't want to see. And when we're finished, we can click on Edit Mesh. Looks like I missed a few, but I think you get the idea. And that could be a very convenient way of making this hat work with different hairstyles. So I worked a little bit more on it using the Edit Mesh tools to hide the hair that was intersecting with the hat here. So here's what I have now. So that's a little bit about creating your own assets and bringing them into Character Creator and iClone. Now, after you've created a accessory such as this one, for example, then you can come over here to Content, find a place where you could appropriately put it, go to the Custom panel here. Perhaps I'll put this in Others. As I can see, there's within the template, there's other types of accessories that we can apply to our characters, but I will go to the Custom tab here, and making sure that my hat is actually selected, I will click on the plus here. You'll notice it actually takes a screenshot here, and we have our cap in here now. Name it. And now this is a resource that I can use in with other characters. So here I've opened up one of my other characters. And notice that now that we've created that resource, we can take it, in this case the baseball cap that I created, and I can drag it onto my character. So there you go. That's how you can create some of your own custom assets. In a future video, we'll look at creating some other assets, such as shirts, pants, that kind of thing. This was a easier example because it's a cap and doesn't really need to deform with the figure itself. Shirt would be a little bit more difficult, but more or less the same process. But we'll take a look at that in a future video. So thank you for watching.